Hey there, this is Uncle Al, or Mr. Al, if you could say. There's just something really cool here. I've been looking at this really cool book, um, Complex PTSD from Surviving to Thriving. There's some really interesting stuff in there I wanted to talk about and just open up for a discussion. So as you know, many of us struggle with, certain cognitive blockages, or we might feel we have deficits in some ways, or we have certain tendencies that can hold us back in life the way almost any other regular person would probably have, even if they're raised by highly, you know, effective and well-adjusted and balanced parents that are, you know, emotionally mature, etc. So there's these, I guess, what they refer in here, they have what's called the 4 Fs. Fight, flight, freeze, and then fawn. And these are interesting, practical ways of looking at this. So, being assertive, or being disengagement, that's flight. And freezing, a healthy way, if you were to freeze, you have this acute awareness, mindfulness, a readiness, presence. And then if you're fawning, like love, service, compromise, listening, fairness, peacemaking. And then going back to fight and flight, with fight, there's assertiveness. There's also, setting boundaries, having courage, leadership skills, or just showing leadership. And then in the flight category, right, there's also, healthy retreating when appropriate, and when it's healthy to do so. Industriousness, work ethic, you could say. Competence, like knowing how to do things and then doing them when it's appropriate or needed. Then there's perseverance, right? So that's going to propel you forward in life, ability to persevere. So these are all the healthy characteristics of those 4 Fs, right? Fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. And then the idea is, that untraumatized people, everybody has a little bit of trauma, but, generally speaking, if you're a relatively untraumatized person, you had let's say, a healthy upbringing, and you had healthy parents and all that other stuff, right? Then you will likely find it easy to engage in these positive characteristics kind of effortlessly and just naturally without really thinking about it. And then easy access to this will ensure, like say if your fight response, you have good boundaries, healthy assertiveness, and then aggressive self-protectiveness if necessary. Untraumatized people can, they can access their flight instinct and disengage and retreat when it's appropriate. They can also freeze appropriately and give up and quit struggling when it is shown to be futile to continue pushing forward on a particular thing. And then also going back to, just naturally being a good listener, helping, compromising readily as they assert and express themselves and their needs. So that's like the healthy side of it, or the empowering aspect of these traits. Going back to the 4 Fs. Now, on the next side of that coin, there are those who are repeatedly or frequently traumatized in childhood during those formative years. They often learn how to cope and survive. They learn to cope and survive in a way that usually involves overcompensating or overusing some of these F responses, being fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, right? And if you fixate on any one of these responses, it limits your ability to access the others, but it also weakens the ability to relax in an undefended state, which could maybe explain where a lot of, where potentially sometimes anxiety disorders might come from. And I'm not a psychologist, but, I would imagine if you have a hard time accessing these things, and then that impairs your ability to relax in an undefensive state, that's just basically generalized anxiety. Like, you can't relax, even when you're sitting still and there's no perceived threat, you're still anxious on edge, right? To me, that sounds a lot like basically what anxiety disorder is. And even depression can be a flip of that coin, as we know, usually depression and anxiety are pretty connected. And then over time, the defenses, for if someone is traumatized, these defenses will serve to distract from, let's say, a nagging or a perpetual inner voice that's critical and is attached to these painful feelings. And then your awareness can become dulled of this past trauma, and then the pain of the current alienation that you're experiencing due to this and the effects of that trauma. And then there are the detrimental characteristics of the 4F defenses. So this is now more of a defensive kind of alienated state. So if we go back to those 4 categories, for fight, remember there's fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, right? So now for fight, we have narcissistic, explosive, controlling, entitlement, sense of entitlement, a bully, autocrat, demands, perfection, sociopath, and then conduct disorders, whatever those may be. In the flight category, we have obsessive, compulsive, disassociative, disassociating, right? Kind of zoning out, staring into space could be part of that. I mean, that could also be ADD, but maybe there's a connection at times. Maybe not. Panicky, rushing, worrying, I mean, rushing and worrying, it seems like nowadays that's just such a common part of modern living maybe not worrying so much, but at least the rushing. Everyone's always in a rush, but being in a rush is different than this kind of state of rushing. But, there are some things that could be cultural problems here, like a, epidemic, you could say. Drive, ness, like adrenaline junkies, right? That's kind of the unhealthy side of the flight response. Always being busy. People tell you that when you're growing up, or even not when you're growing up, when you're an adult, people will just mindlessly make the statement like, "Oh, you're keeping busy. Are you busy? Stay busy. It's good to be busy." I mean, I've heard that so many times, And is that really healthy, just to keep busy? For what purpose should I be keeping busy? To be more productive, to make more money, to maybe we could say distract yourself from your own thoughts so you don't have to face them and deal with them, so you just make yourself constantly busy so you don't have time to reflect and then have to face challenging emotions and thoughts that you want to avoid. I mean, I would say it's probably more that. But if you want to be busy and make money and all that shit, then go right ahead. Micromanaging. Oh, well, I mean, there's plenty of people that like to micromanage people in authority positions. It's the micromanaging. I'm sure we've all experienced that to an extent, even not necessarily in a job, even, but just dealing with other people in collaborative ways. Perfectionism, yeah, it's more connected to that flight response, as we can see here in this. So you got these cool charts here. You see that? It's all mapped out. So there's the flight response, perfectionism, and then it's also can be connected to mood disorders and also ADHD. It's kind of flighty, like monkey mind. And I think that's a common problem today. You see that with young kids now. They're hyperactive a lot of the time. Well, if you teach elementary school now, I mean, any elementary teacher in this current time we're in will probably testify to that there has been like if you talk to a veteran elementary teacher who's been doing it for, let's say, 20 years or more, or even 10 years, that you'll now see, like, they will testify to this, and I've seen it myself. I've taught elementary for 2 years now. You could see how it's really, the attention spans have gotten a lot worse. And there could be some trauma here connected to this ADHD kind of stuff, and ADHD-like symptoms that are very present now in a large amount of kids. Inattentiveness, and this technology stuff can certainly be traumatizing. The constant stimulation by screens, and while in school they may not have a smartphone on them, so when they're home, going around about their day, there's this constant screen in front of their face with hyperstimulation, and then all the manipulative algorithms of social media and TikTok and all this other bullshit. No age verification, so you have kids who shouldn't even be on these sites going on them, and that's causing trauma that they're not even aware of. And stress and tension, it's making their attention spans very short, and it's a problem. That was not really present in the past, from what I remember. Growing up in the early 2000s, that stuff hadn't taken over yet, and there was attention spans. I think were definitely stronger at that point. And even as an adult, I notice now with the way things are, with all the tech ruling everything, basically, it's hard to sit down and actually read a book. Because we're so used to the scrolling and the quick bites of information. It's like sitting and reading a book that can feel overwhelming. That's how damaging this stuff is. It's really devastating, really, when you think about it. So now going into the unhealthy or defensive aspect of the freeze response, right? Being codependent. You see a lot of that today. Codependent relationships, and not necessarily just romantic relationships, like just personal relationships, codependence in multiple ways, even between parents and kids. That could be another thing too. Well, that's a little more complicated though, but with other people, codependence, I guess you are kind of freezing in that. It's like there's like this frozen aspect of that where you codependency, it's like you're stuck, so you freeze. Contracting, okay, well, that can mean a few things. You're just being in a state of, you're contracting, like your mind's, mind's contracting. Hiding from others, not maybe literally necessary, but trying to hide yourself, being afraid to be yourself, right? That's what I imagine that would mean. Fear of being authentic, not. Isolation, sure. That's very common. A lot of people are isolating themselves. Couch potato, okay. Well, we've all been guilty of that. I'm certainly guilty of that, of couch potatoing. I couch potato probably every day for about 2 hours or more. Or, well, when I'm busy, I don't do that as much. But at night, I'll probably spend at least 2 hours on the couch. Maybe one, just, it's addictive. And that's part of that kind of freeze response. Just kind of zoning out, vegging out, as they say. And we often don't think of vegging out as a freeze response, but when you look at it objectively, you could say it kind of is. And then also just going back to the ADHD, ADD kind of thing. Connect to that as well. And then the fawning. Unhealthy traits of fawning. We have obsequious, servitude, groveling. Okay, that's interesting. Loss of self. All right, sure. People pleasing, feeling like you need to please others constantly, and then feeling anxiety if you're not doing so. Looking for approval, goes back to that, right? Approval from others, wanting to feel like you're being loved. Being a doormat, letting people walk all over you. Slave. I mean, okay, sure. Some of us might make themselves a slave to someone else in a more, not a literal way, of course, but in other ways. Letting someone else control you, right? social aspects tie into that also. Whatever, I mean, social interaction. Perfectionism, sure. And it kind of goes back to the fight response also in some ways. Need for perfection, or then fawning, being perfectionistic. And then parentified child. So when a child feels like they have to, in a way, kind of be the parent or take on parental roles that normally they would not have to take on in a healthy family dynamic. So it's very interesting, right? And how you can look at these traits in this book here. And then, as we can see, there's a thing, CPTSD, complex post-traumatic stress disorder. It's an attachment disorder. So there's attachment, excessive reliance on 4 Fs: fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response is the traumatized child's unconscious attempt to cope with constant danger. There's also a strategy to strengthen illusions that their parents really care. So yeah, it's pretty interesting. And saying fawn types usually avoid emotional investment and potential disappointment by barely showing themselves. They hide behind their helpful personas and over-listen and kind of just overdo everything in order to please others. By over-focusing on their parents or whoever, partners, they don't have to risk real self-exposure and the possibility of a deep level of rejection, which they want to avoid because they've been traumatized by that. So anyway, pretty interesting, right?